The channel Lazarus was perhaps the first person to voice the statement, you and I, create your own reality. And Lazarus at various points has made that particularly emphasized by saying no ifs, ands, and buts. You create your own reality with your thoughts, feelings, beliefs, choices, attitudes, etc. And so this explores my own relationship with that truth, that truth. And if you think of the ego relationship with reality, I often think of a black dome with a little bit of the God consciousness inside that dome. And then outside of the dome is the larger sense of the God Goddess, all that is construct. And so you have an isolated portion of the self inside the dome of the human ego with these little pinpricks. And these little pinpricks are things like truths. A truth is a pinprick out into the larger reality. And if you look through this little slit in that pinprick, you see that which is able to come in and be processed and digested by this bit of consciousness, the ego self. And so you have this interconnected ecology of reality with these little domes seemingly isolating individuals called egos, and the body could be considered one of those domes. And in the black dome of the body, you have these little pinpricks through which energy can go back and forth with the larger reality, the larger self of which it is a part. And so a truth, a statement, allows us to experience reality through a certain lens. And the question, therefore, is not so much, is it true? The truth is the shape of the cut. You can cut a hole in that little black dome that's square, that's big, that's small, that's rectangular, that's hexagonal. You can create a shape however you wish to perceive reality, because reality is that which comes in through that shape and connects the isolated or illusionarily isolated sense of the inner self with the outer self. And the conscious mind both decides what little holes to cut in the dome, and this is kind of in the mental framework of beliefs. Prior choices decide what kind of sensory observing and measuring devices we'll have as an individual. And so here we are inside this experience of isolation, this dome, and then relating outside through our thoughts, through our feelings, our beliefs. So in that sense, what does it mean? Now, as an adolescent, one of the things that I took this to mean was I was creating my parents' divorce and all the fights and stuff like this. And this was a very difficult thing to wrestle with as an adolescent. 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, I'm living at home in a largely dysfunctional family. And how am I creating this? And so Lazarus framed these as, being your beliefs and your choices, et cetera, et cetera. And so I would do various meditations and work on my, different beliefs and attitudes. And my parents kept on fighting. And, so it was very painful. In that period, I was suicidal, at some times in terms of considering, was it worth living? And so how do you grapple with that? And and this also creates a certain amount of skepticism. What do you mean? I'm creating my reality. I would like to live in a stable, happy house. I do not. The meditations don't seem to change that all that much. And so what to do there? And at a later state in some of my therapy, feeling angry, feeling hurt, one of the things that can happen with New Age type children, adolescent, because my parents were working with some of this as well, particularly when it came to asking me why I, as the 14-year-old child, was creating the reality of the things that I didn't like about them. And then Lazarus is saying this as well. So it's like, what? I think one of the things that children and adolescents go to is, what's wrong with me that I'm creating this? And it feels kind of like everything wrong, then I will be punished for or blamed, which is a very terrifying and small place, because then what can I do about it? If I write my old belief and tear it up and burn it in a fire, and then write a new belief, and my parents just fight again as usual, am I doing something wrong? And what am I doing wrong? And so this can be a certain sense of shame. So there was some pent-up feelings. I remember on the Jack and Lazarus forum, I wrote about my anger at Lazarus at one point. And, a woman there who worked closely with Lazarus and kind of was friends with Jack and Penny, the channel and the channel's wife, said she didn't want to hear about my anger with Lazarus. And so again, this feeling is wrong. And yet, how to process this, how to make sense of it. And so to a certain extent, there's a lot of kind of fear, stress, anxiety around doing it wrong. Talking to therapists later, for example, Ann Watts, Human Awareness Institute facilitator, who I chose as a therapist, she said, no, this is not right. That's wrong. You don't tell a teenager that they're creating their reality. And so then again, where to turn to this? Concept Synergy being notorious for that's the company that produces the Lazarus or sells the Lazarus material, the notorious for not taking a great interest in their clients, particularly any critical feedback. That's not going to get anywhere. So where to go with this stuff? And so there's a certain amount of pressure. I create my own reality. I appreciate and really take to heart a lot of things that Lazarus is sharing, but this just seems to kind of lead me into feeling like a shit for not being able to create these things. And so just what to do with that. And I didn't really know, particularly as my first partner worked closely with Lazarus. And it seemed like there were all kinds of pretty obvious dynamics going on. We would have conflicts about dishes, for example, when we were living together, and none of these meditations and stuff seemed to really shift that. It's like you've been and so from an adolescent point of view, there's this sense of well, if this is right, then someone ought to be doing this perfectly, preferably the channel and Concept Synergy and all that. I mean, they're working with this all the time. And so how is it that their life isn't working out you're having a temper tantrum after doing all these meditations. You're being controlling and childish. You're fighting and bringing up, your anger and aggression as a way of dealing with the fact that you don't feel comfortable talking about what you're scared of, and this is full of shit. And so the adolescent very much, this is bullshit, this is full of shit. And so what do we do with that? And I've always had a little bit of an engineering mind. And so, I said, I'm not going to fuck around with this create your own reality bullshit. I'm going to just do things that are intelligent. I'm with a bossy girlfriend, etc. I'm going to leave the bossy girlfriend. Now I'm not with a bossy girlfriend. And it didn't take a Lazarus meditation or anything like that. I just left. I, got sick of my family and I left home. And then, I wanted to start a business. So I, went to the library and studied, Brian Tracy's advanced selling strategies. And then that's how you start a business. You approach people. I can do this and I can do that, and so I'm going to do that. And so why is it that I can spend these thousands of hours studying this and this on the inner world, and then just go out and do things? And that seems to shift reality much more. And Lazarus does say we change our reality with our choices and decisions. And that seems pretty obvious. I mean, you turn left and your car turns left. I mean, that's pretty much the traditional sense of reality. But then what about this other stuff? Like, the wars in your life, nobody asked me to turn on the weather station. Does it rain or not? So, what's up with that? And so I would say that, I enjoyed many of the stimulating thoughts. Lazarus talks a lot about language and things. I also then read the Seth material around the same age, 14, etc., because once I discovered channeling, by my whole process with Lazarus, then it seemed like, creating reality was interesting, and kind of Seth talked about similar things. But there's a tremendous amount of paradox around all of this, and at some level, I feel this tremendous anxiety around just trying to change people based on belief, because that's really what it boils down to in terms of the things that I wanted to change were not the way trees looked. They weren't the way rocks were structured. They weren't the taste of water. I wasn't trying to change the taste of water or whatever. It was how other people behaved towards me or around me or towards each other. Or that's also what I wanted to change, the way I connect with other people. And so that bit didn't seem to work. And the whole idea that other people were an illusion, so, a figment of my imagination, something Lazarus has said, it sounded even more lonely than I felt at the time. And so there's still, a charge around that loneliness of, people are just figments of imagination, etc. But also, I felt a deep fear of getting lost in this sense, because there are self-referential loops that you can create. It's often done with religion. This is the Word of God. Okay, that's the starting point. If you believe that, then you have to say, okay, what does God say? And God says, I am like this, and I'm not like this, and you should do this, and you should do that. And then you say, well, you should do it because it's the Word of God. And it's the Word of God because God says it's the Word of God. And it's like you can get trapped in, what do I do? It's like, And so I've gotten stuck in those points and felt a range of different emotions, from ashamed or scared of being punished. The understanding, doing the shame and trauma work in childhood with therapists, the understanding that that's abusive in a certain respect. To some level, it's abusive to tell a 14-year-old traumatized suicidal teen that he's creating the reality, i.e. the parental traumas that are leading to a suicidal level of pain. And if that doesn't alleviate the issue, maybe the focus ought to be on creating a culture, that includes children's feelings, for example, rather than the inane census or, minimally useful census. They come around, they spend, billions of dollars going to every home in America to find out, what, I'm still white? Are you Caucasian? Are you? And then publishing this data, you learn how many bodies are there. But what about asking any of people on those censuses, 1 to 10, how depressed are you? 1 to 10, how suicidal are you? 1 to 10, how good of a parent are you in this, and this, and publishing useful data of that nature. But of course, no one's ever asked. And so there's all kinds of things going on, which we are willfully ignorant about. And so, in that sense, like, that just seems a lot more useful and intelligent than I create my own reality with my beliefs and stuff like that. So if I believe my parents can suddenly change, they will just change. And so and that the idea then of also choosing one's parents. And I felt particularly annoyed with the idea that they don't seem to emphasize that. I've heard various people saying, you choose your parents, but nobody telling me that my parents chose me, which might be much more useful when being harangued by a parent. Why are you like this and why are you like that? To say, well, you chose me, as opposed to, why did I choose these parents that are haranguing me? And so, throughout that period, I would say that, whether it was building my first house successfully, learning about real estate, growing my business, learning to operate heavy equipment, I just didn't see any inner belief meditation type things working or being terribly relevant. I had to figure out, A, what I wanted, B, what would be some ways that would make that happen, C, analyze the cost-benefit analysis of each of those strategies, and then D, implement the strategies that took me to where I wanted to go. And that worked very well. And so ultimately I began to take an approach of, you show me how that works better than any other way, and I'll be interested. You talk about theory and philosophy, go fuck yourself. I'm sick and tired of people telling me how my reality works without anyone, just modeling it. If that works, go in, do your meditation, and you won't even have to tell me. You can believe that I already know it. And I will. And then we can have a conversation with it. And so that's that there's some of that, feistiness coming in, and a determination to do what I want to do because I want to do it, etc. And learn more of those techniques, negotiating techniques, requesting techniques, boundaries, things like that. And so that's been a big drift. Now the areas where I see a real applicability to the belief thing is it came up in 2008 when the entire housing industry in the United States just collapsed, which effectively meant that contracting work, including landscaping, just collapsed. And, for a couple of years, there were far fewer calls than there were otherwise. And so in that sense, what to do? And I asked myself a question because I'd met a woman who had an online university, and the impact of the recession on her was explosive growth. Why? Well, it was very obvious. Everyone wants to save money in a recession, and when there's low employment, everyone wants to grow, invest in their education, because that's considered the culturally acceptable way to get employed, is get another degree, get some credits and this, that, and the other. And so she owned an online university where fees were half the cost of attending a university in person. So everyone was saving money, putting money in there, and so her business was growing. And so that made rational sense. And so I asked myself a belief question. Do I believe that it is possible for my business, not the whole landscape industry, that seems a bit far-fetched, but for my business, while everyone else's business is collapsing, do I believe it is possible that my business could go up? And I knew it was possible because one of the things that happens in recessions is that top contractors working on billionaires' homes keep working, because if a billionaire is building a summer house or something like that, and their wealth suddenly goes from 5 billion down to 3 billion, well, they've still got enough money for their summer house, so that continues. And so I knew that in the very high niche sections of the economy, work was completely uninterrupted. And I also knew that people involved with education and saving money, were doing better than average. So then I said, okay, so is there any way that I could be involved with education and saving people money? And I thought teaching classes, as opposed to them paying me $175 an hour, take a class for $30 or whatever. So teaching classes was one. Another is the idea of writing a book. So I did both, and my income did indeed grow significantly. And so that's a framework where, if I didn't believe that it was possible that my business would grow, I wouldn't have even have asked the question. So you have to see the belief comes before the reality. Next, if I didn't believe it was possible for me to write a book, I wouldn't have written a book. Because if you say, I absolutely can't write a book, you don't sit down and start writing a book. If you believe I can, or it's at least possible to write a book, then I sit down, I start practicing, I take a course on writing a book and learn to write a book, or write a chapter and say, can I do this? Yes. Well, then can I do 30 more of these? Which was my approach. It's like, if I can finish a chapter and I can make a list of chapters, I can write a book. I just have to decide how many of those chapters to put in a book. And I can do a thin book or a medium book or a very thick book, just depending on how many of those chapters I want to write. And so I thought, I can write a chapter. I have written a chapter. I will write 30 or so chapters, and I will have a book. And so in that areas, I see the belief as being a prerequisite, but I also see the underlying reality being a prerequisite. For example, how am I going to type a book if no one has invented the typewriter? How can I believe that 1 million copies could be sold if I'm in bark age technology, where peel off bits of bark and use a little bit of charcoal from a fire to scribble a few notes, and you peel a perfect section of bark and you can get a page on there, and how are you going to get 1 million copies of those in Native American times? That's the bit that seems kind of just absurd. And yet that seems to be what the creating your own reality folks seem to be emphasizing. Just don't, and that would have been kind of the irrational way of doing it. To go into my room of beliefs and do absolutely nothing different, but just to say, I believe that my business will just grow. And I've experienced too many painful, one, that doesn't seem to make much sense, and two, if I do that, I just feel like a fool with no one to talk to. And that's kind of the deepest, darkest terrain of the creating your own reality probability field for my psyche, is this idea that, Lazarus and Seth didn't actually care enough about me to understand my reality and my psychology, or even to talk to me in person. They channeled through other people. And then they give me this spiel that absolutely doesn't work, and they just watch me failing and failing and failing, and it just seems profoundly humiliating. I think, you fucking cowards, just sitting there telling these kids this and, this. And so, in that sense, there's a sense of almost being set up to fail, and the shame of humiliation. Like, you were dumb enough to believe that if people are getting divorced right and left in this country, but you believe because you put your headphones on and did a meditation that you'd change that, or you believed people would just start calling you for no reason, just because you want them to. That just seems painful. It seems lonely, and it seems, I think also the fear of insanity. Having watched the delusions of my parents, the fear of insanity was also there. I don't want to be left all alone in a delusion that I chose, and so that it just felt very, very lonely. And so that's the bitter side of this dynamic and growth period. And so I focused on mastering techniques in a variety of different ways. And took a break from around age 28 until maybe, this past year or so. I've largely taken a break from that focus. It just didn't seem helpful. As I was getting in touch with the horror and pain of childhood and stuff like that, and trauma, how does it facilitate anything to say, why did you create that 10-year-old, 5-year-old me? And so I definitely discharged it. And in this focus of my life, it's very much at looking at statistical data. This kind of a culture produces X amount of rapes per 1,000 people. This kind of a culture produces a completely different, half the number of rapes per 1,000 people. Injecting arsenic in someone kills pretty much 100% of the people where high doses of arsenic are injected before and then left there, not able to repair. So if you kill 100% of people by injecting arsenic, and you nourish 100% of people by giving them water, then shouldn't we focus on giving people water and not putting arsenic in them, rather than on talking about creating your own reality? How is that different than science and just looking at what algorithms and statistical fallouts come from those algorithms? Meaning, you put water into a glass and give it to 1,000 people, and 1,000 people get get healthier. You give arsenic to 1,000 people and they die. Should we be telling the people dying with arsenic poison to focus on their beliefs or to stop drinking arsenic? And so that focus that's just a common sense. So what we need to study from that angle is what phenomena create which probability fields, and then understanding that we're all wanting to move towards conscious well-being, which steps could take us in that direction. And then let's educate people and practice it ourselves and, make changes and stuff. Let's do that. And so that's pretty much, what I've been doing. The Seth material and the Lazarus material are all they're all wrapped up around this concept of creating your own reality. And so while there were other things in the Lazarus material that seemed very useful, like doing inner child work, the meditations and stuff, doing shame work, doing work with jealousy, envy, rage, these things, I would do a meditation and feel better. I would write a poem and feel better. I would have a meditation and understand myself more. Did it change my parents' divorce? No. Did it change my understanding? Yes. And so I worked with that, but there's a lot of exposure. And so I rejected Lazarus altogether because there were just too many of those types of things, one, and not an ability to resolve them. Again, it felt humiliating to reach out to Concept Synergy and basically kind of get the message that I'm doing it wrong, or that I don't matter, as opposed to maybe this stuff is fucked up. It's hard to say. So I kind of pushed the whole thing out and focused on mechanics, I would call it. It's very easy to increase your business, build a better website. So there's mechanics in that. So you have to learn this and this. And then if you want to be viewed, you have to learn search engine optimization. Common sense. You want to be viewed by thousands of people, get a business on Main Street. So all of that has continued to work. The difficulty came in the sense of loneliness and isolation that I experience in our culture as a man. There's particularly today, being affectionate, expressing need, expressing vulnerability, even with this whole, creating your own reality, having these deep traumatic feelings is somewhat taboo. It's very easy to be called a creep by a woman in this culture for being affectionate or being attracted. It's just, I don't want to be called a creep and this, that. I'm wanting, a sense of healing and belonging, and this culture seems committed to avoiding deep emotional depths of belonging and healing. So how do I do that? And I've, of course, tried with those mechanical things, and again, that's the area of pain and failure, to find people able and willing to explore in those domains. And this is just incredibly sad. And again, does it help me to say, well, I must have a belief that's faulty around there when that doesn't seem to change anything? Or does it help me just to be mad and do something about it? In this case, travel the world and find cultures where I felt much more emotionally included than my own. The latter made a tremendous amount of sense and a tremendous amount of difference. However, over time, what I've found is this sense of getting thin, of losing inner vitality and of innocence and of joy and of beauty, being wrapped and becoming cynicism and becoming bitterness and becoming exhaustion and becoming tired and becoming irritable and becoming hate and becoming, it's like, and so I've got this reality that I can keep going through the mechanics and motions around. But I don't want to live. It's just miserable. And so, in that sense, I began looking for revitalization protocols, where there would be much more energy coming in with this protocol as opposed to going out, because that's how you revitalize. And yet that didn't work. For example, I could write 100 emails to women in online dating, and only 2 of the ones coming back would be really nice. So I'm spending 100 and I'm getting back 2. That's a 2% return on investment. It's miserable. I'm tired after that. Or I could, do this and this and this. Money is generally one of the easiest. It's just not hard to make money in this culture, but to create a sense of joyful well-being around that, as opposed to just irritated that my crew won't pick up garbage again unless I'm nagging them. It's like what to do. Just get a different crew, and I'm not getting the response there, and so that's why I say that the issue seems to be around people, and so in that exhaustion period and in the pain and in the loneliness of so much of this just being invisible, that's one of the reasons I'm creating this project, is to create visibility around the things that our culture is willfully ignorant and silent about. And so that's, this brings a little bit of awareness to that, which is, again, a project. But, how to find projects that advanced the things that really matter to my heart without being burned out and exhausted by the fact that the culture is unreceptive and is highly receptive of these draining activities that are adding to the bitterness. And so that became a variety of different explorations. And I'm looking at the concept again from an energy resonance point of view. And I guess the reason for that is returning to the material, having exhausted myself and kind of depleted a lot of my inner resources. Just the ability to find moments in meditation of being transcendently filled and renewed, such that I come out with energy to share, to create. I note that works. And so as the engineer, it's like, okay, Lazarus meditations work for that. Reading the Seth material works for that. Spending time with my wife works for that as well. And so there's a variety of different things. And so I'm getting, re-exposed to this, you create your own reality. And there's all kinds of paradoxes around this, because, Seth will say something like, the second coming of the third Christ, Paul, Saul, will take place by the year 1975. And then he'll say, we don't make predictions as a general rule, because you can't, there's free will and things are always changing. Well, you did make a prediction. And so, there's this paradox, and some of this is irritating on a rational level. But there's also a very interesting thing happening as I lift my resonance in working with these things. Like right after most of the forgiveness meditations that I do, work flows towards me. So I forgive myself, and suddenly there's an explosion of calls on my answering machine saying, please let us give you money. That wasn't working with the beliefs or whatever. This is, a forgiveness meditation. It seems like I'm being supported in the larger framework of self, in doing self-forgiveness work, and that part of forgiveness, there's some correlation to how much abundance or wealth will come in. But I don't, at this point, go into my room of beliefs and say, I believe that after this meditation, I'm going to have calls and work, because I've gone down that road too much before, and it just, part of me doesn't believe it. In part, I'll look at something like, and this is the some of the skeptic of the young adult and adolescent. I'll look at the Channel Jack and say, well, if all you had to do is go in and you knew how to do beliefs properly because you're working with Lazarus for 40 years, then improve your website, get your products to download properly. Why don't you believe in that? And there's this sense of, I'm not going to buy into this thing only to be blamed. So who's going to show, like, I want to believe in something that I can watch someone doing it consistently, one, and then two, that I can figure out how to do it, and three, that there's a dialogue with that. I don't want to just be set up, to go do something completely crazy and then be blamed when it doesn't work. And so there's that definite caution around that. And then there's also plenty of things around this where it's not just is something true, it's is that truth useful at this time? Like, is it useful when doing deep trauma work to focus on why did you create the trauma? It might be, but it can be very distracting of feeling the grief and the anger of all those feelings. And so that seemed more productive. And so in terms of how we create our reality and how much can shift, and this can of course be go to the national level. You may be upset with the current president, who as we speak is Donald Trump, but if going into the room of beliefs and saying I believe I have a new president doesn't result in anything, then what is the way of, then how does that not just humiliate oneself, is I guess one theme, having had a lot of kind of shaming humiliation from my father, where I felt so small and so foolish and so alone and so blamed and punished so deeply. I don't want to just be put into that state where I'm this unloved person in this small place saying, what did I do wrong? And there's still a tremendous amount of feeling stored in my body around those moments. So the place that I'm in now around this is I participate in creating the reality inside and around, and that what goes on in my inner world has an enormous impact on how I see the world and relate to the world, etc. So that definitely resonates with me. And I'm very open to the idea, knowing that I'm a little ego in this, in this black cocoon of illusionary separation. We're breathing the air of the trees. We're connected through water, air, substance, movement. We're completely connected in this ecology, and yet we look out and we feel like that's that, and this is me, and so just opening up to that, emotionally and energetically, with the focus not so much on getting caught on the abstracts of this or is that, if that means that and that means that, but simply, what can I do? What can I do within the choices available to me, mentally, emotionally, and physically, and socially, and financially? It's what can I do that creates abundance and creates, because a lot more of it in recent years has been feeling alive and feeling energized and feeling beautiful and wanting to live. It's it's like, fine, I have a BMW, I feel depressed. It's nothing about the car or whatever. It's just what's involved with that inner work. And so it's in that domain that I think that being involved with both truths, the truths of cause and effect, the truths of rationality, the truths of mass. You know, if you're one finger and you're trying to move a whole hand that has a lot of weight behind it, it's not a good proposition. You need, in laws of momentum, an equal amount of mass. It doesn't mean there's not ways around that. For example, the one finger can enlist the other fingers to participate, and we can find partners, but that goes back to, are people able and willing to partner around that? So as I'm re-exposing myself, I'm listening again to the Seth materials and doing Lazarus meditations to work with physiology and emotions very powerfully, meaning I don't know any other thing that I could do, regardless of the amount of money available to me or what place on the planet, where I could do much more than that. And so that's a phenomenal thing to be experiencing, and I'm very grateful for it. And with those same teachers comes this framework of you create your own reality. So I think it's a useful truth depending on the context. I think that it is true, but may not be true for the part of us that we're dealing with. For example, 5,000 channels can all tell me that I chose my parents. But if I'm defining the I as the one with this little black dome over, all around me with a few little pinpricks, and none of those reveal that truth, like I have no memory of choosing my parents, then the question is, well, it's obviously not me, because I don't remember it. It's not the conscious me that I know. Then we can say, well, is it useful to consider that? And then it depends on what's the relationship and what's the stage of that relationship. It's not useful for me when I'm still releasing and feeling traumatic feelings that I couldn't deal with in childhood. That's not particularly useful. On the other side of that, and stretching into a larger sense of self, then it may be interesting to look at what have I learned and how have I grown and matured out of these particular challenges. And Seth talks about this a lot more than Lazarus from my experience, about why we might choose different experiences from a larger self. And so I'm in this place, I guess, of creating far more of a reality than I ever dreamed possible as a child in terms of outer things, whether it's building houses or making money or traveling the world or whatever it is. And at the same time, what interests me is focusing on the choices and expanding the choices and the possibilities. The choices to think, the choices to feel, the choices to plan a future, the choices of what to dream about, the choices of which actions to take in order to create those dreams, and the choice to monitor that and reward it so that I'll do more of it, to do things that give me energy and stop doing things that deplete me, since energizing is a big focus at this time. And so that's kind of how I'm working with creating my own reality. And I find myself curious about yours. How do you work with creating your reality? Okay, this is my framework for creating a reality. And it begins by understanding that everything is possible somewhere, sometime, in some dimension. And so we have actually an expectation that everything exists somewhere in the possibility field of all that is. And then within that much larger sphere, there is the smaller circle of my possibility, meaning that which seems possible and even relevant to the question of possible within my imagination. And I distinguish these two because there is just so much stuff. One could easily say 99.99999% of all the stuff that's out there that's possible is beyond my ability to put it into language. And being beyond my ability to put it into language, I can't create an image of it. And so it's not part of my possibility field. And so we have, the true possibility field. Then we have the limitation of human imagination. If you can imagine it, it is possible. In some place, in some time, in some dimension. And one can look at the possibility field as a landscape that one zooms in on or zooms out on. And that whether it's the density of reality or a possibility to some extent is determined by how much we zoom in and out of it. And why, of course. So we have this thing that's possible. Now, this is great news because everything that we want is something that we can put into language. Even if we say, what I really want is an answer to this ache in my belly. What I really want is some way for this ache to unravel and to open up a new space. And in that ache to fill a sense of goodness, a sense of healing, a sense of beauty, a sense of joy, a sense of rightness. That's what I want. And I don't know exactly how it looks, but I know how it feels. And so I want that. And the glimmerings that I get around that of children safely playing together, of being in a big tree, of being in a landscape without chemicals and utility poles, etc., of having smaller, more intimate homes. I can carry that feeling into imagery. And if I can imagine it, I can create it. It is let's say this. If I can imagine it, it is possible. So there are, of course, a variety of ways of experiencing that possibility. One is to create it in the here and now. The other is to create a rendition in the here and now. For example, make it a lot more real by turning it into a painting, or turning it into a meditation, or carving a little village, or writing it into a story, a novel. So there's different ways that I can zoom in on that possibility. And I think the biggest disservice of our cult is the idea that what one imagines is not real and is, in a certain sense, a distraction from the industrial pollution that is so much of our modern age. And the manufacturing of those various pollutants and objects and that somehow that's what's real. But this is just a belief. It's just a perspective. And we are, of course, navigating around and exploring how to most potently and effectively create our reality in a way that reflects our values, our dreams, our ideals. And so just creating and clarifying and putting the possibility we desire into language is the first step. Respecting the potency of articulated possibility is the second step. To discard and make room in the debris of the cultural belief and different structures of thinking, to make room in that. Thirdly, to make it more real, to become intimate with that reality in some way. A poem, a story, an art, in other words, to take it to a denser form of intimacy, a denser form of imagination. Now, the third or kind of fourth step is to analyze its probability. Is this possibility probable? One. And how close is it to probability? You can watch Elon Musk do this with the city on Mars. When he founded SpaceX, he thought there was an 80% chance that he would fail. So he knew it was possible for him to start a space company. But it wasn't probable for it to succeed. And all of his friends discouraged him from starting SpaceX and discouraged him from focusing on space at all, etc., etc. So he believed it was possible but not probable. But he did it anyway. And it became more and more probable. And by the time the fourth rocket finally lifted off and didn't blow up, etc., it became actual. It became actual. And so this is an incredible transformation from something that's possible, one human being facilitating interplanetary migration. That's never been done before in the conscious record of our histories. And going from impossible to possible, from possible to probable, from probable to actual, as a company. And the same kind of thing is going from possible but not probable to somewhat probable in terms of when we will have human beings on Mars. It's a phenomenal movement. And the framework of going between the limited sense of human possibility to the even more limited sense of human probability. And remember, this is the sphere that is defined by anything that anyone has imagined. So any human being in history, in the history of human beings, that has been able to imagine something, it's in this possibility field. And from that possibility field, certain things have moved down to probability, and then certain things have moved into actuality. And so this is where beliefs come in as a key, beliefs and choices, basically. So if you believe something, for example, my belief in that place, if I look at the probability of that happening in my life with me, I would say that the probability of that happening is about 10%. because there's the desire, there's the longing, and there are some things that are in place in my life that could bring that about. But there's also my distaste of dealing with bureaucracies, my impatience with people that don't agree with me in areas that I care about, the cultural avoidance patterns of funding things like this. And so there's a lot of different obstacles. Now, if I care about that possibility and I want to nurture it deeper into probability, then I can do a variety of things. And those things might include researching land, researching groups that are interested in co-creating something of this nature, writing a book about it, making videos about it, and here again, the question is, how much engagement do we have with these different things? But the key thing is that if we list out the things that need to be done to make something highly probable, and then list out other things that could be done to make things highly probable. I mean, it's not just our list. You can approach it in a variety of ways. Finding a good global real estate agent increases the probability, 1% maybe? Forming a network of people who are interested in 10x living, and moving in that direction is another way of doing that. That probably increases things by about 40%. The creation of 10 or more people who are truly excited about a 10x lifestyle, a lifestyle that's 10 times more potent and dynamic than their other than the current lifestyle, creates another framework for that. And then you have, a variety of other things. Finding financing for a project like this is another, thing that makes it significantly more probable. And then there's different things. It's more probable to find a group of people interested in a 10x lifestyle than it is to find a single source of private financing that's just interested in facilitating these abilities. So these are all lists which can, be a couple of hundred items can be developed on the list of turning a lifestyle, a community of feeling, into reality. And then as we walk on the points of that list, we walk the possibility into probability to a certain extent by taking dense action that zooms our awareness into that domain. And so this is part of this is part of a journey. Now, once we have it probable, meaning it's highly probable when the people involved believe that it will happen. That's one of the cementing forms. If you've got 30 people involved or 20 people involved and they believe it will happen and are willing to act consistently with that belief, which they are, because if you believe it will happen, you do act consistent with your beliefs. And so with 20 people having a clear and effective map and believing it will happen and acting consistent with that probability field, now you've got, maybe 60% chance that it will happen. And then the moving into it happening is an incremental stage as it takes the densest form of all, that which shows up in the five senses, at this time, and then results in actually being. Now, every part of this process is important. Picking the possibility to manifest is important. Expanding the field of possibility to a point big enough to decide what kinds of things to manifest is important. And being with the intimacy of the feelings around that, to make it real right from the get-go, so that the journey towards it is valuable, is also important. And finally, bringing it into reality and sustaining it. What are the choices and behaviors that will sustain this thing that is now created? To maintain and sustain that which is created. That is also a process of bringing from the possible into the actual. And the key is to sustain belief each step of the way, and to create patterns that integrate with reality. And the measure of success in this journey is the coherence, is the coherence to the resonance and how it felt originally, to the process of getting there step by step. There's a coherence factor, and that coherence factor, it can be measured. Am I feeling the way that I wanted to feel when I dreamed about this? Am I taking the steps that I said I would take? Is my reality reflecting, moving towards, that particular goal? And then how have we arrived? And then we can look at other things like, did we arrive on time and did we arrive on budget and stuff? But if you have a pattern of creating things together or alone that leads in this particular process, then the question is, where and how to create that again, because if that can be brought into a clearly articulated framework, you've now got a pattern to create more and more, when you say your reality, the reality that you most desire.